9 hikers vanish in the frozen dark, a family murdered in their beds, and something still watching from just beyond your door. These are not legends. These are true stories, and tonight, you'll hear them all.
He was waiting just beyond his window, watching him in the dark, and he knew it was only a matter of time. John Mercer was a quiet man who lived alone on the outskirts of Maplewood, Oregon. A librarian by trade, he had spent most of his life in the hush of the stacks, surrounded by brittle pages and the comforting scent of old glue. He preferred books to people, solitude to conversation. For years, no one thought much of it until the letters began to arrive. It started in late October 1987, when neighbors noticed the first envelope, propped neatly against his front door. Plain white, no return address. Inside, only a single line typed in crisp black letters. "It's coming." He shrugged it off as a prank, though he said nothing to the mail carrier when she asked about the delivery. Instead, he tapped the note to his refrigerator, a silent reminder he couldn't quite bring himself to throw away. A few days later, a second envelope appeared. Same white paper, same flat declaration. "It's coming." He tried to dismiss the unease curling in his stomach. Maybe teenagers were playing tricks. Maybe it was a mistake. But that night, John thought he heard something moving out by the tree line, a low scrape in the darkness that set his teeth on edge. When he switched on the porch light, the yard lay empty. By the time the third envelope came, the warnings had changed. "It waits for you." That night, he sat up late in the kitchen, listening to the cold wind rattling the pines. He described to the clerk at the corner store how he pressed his ear against the door and heard a low humming, like machinery turning somewhere underground. But when he opened the door to look, only the darkness and the sigh of fallen leaves greeted him. Word spread quickly. A pale figure was seen standing among the pines, gaunt and impossibly tall, with long arms that hung motionless. Its face was a blank void, darker than the shadows around it. A delivery driver swore he caught it, watching the house, and when his headlights struck the yard, the figure vanished, as though it had never been there at all. By early November, John's habits changed. He stopped collecting his newspaper. He stopped going to the library. Purchases dwindled until he came only to buy instant coffee and bread. He looked thinner every time the clerk glimpsed him, skin drawn tight over high cheekbones, eyes ringed with purple shadows. The day he didn't appear at all, no one was surprised, though everyone felt guilty later for thinking it. Inside his front yard, frost blanketed the grass. Footprints led toward the porch, crisp impressions where the blades had been crushed. No footprints returned. Neighbors noticed his windows were cracked open, even as temperatures dropped below freezing, as if he was letting something in. At night, the blinds glowed with a pulsing yellow light, brightening, fading, brightening again until dawn crept over the rooftops. I arrived one gray afternoon in mid-November, along with 2 uniformed officers. The air was damp and heavy, carrying a scent like rain mixed with something sour. The curtains in the front window were drawn aside, and I glimpsed a kitchen table set for one. A chipped white mug, cold coffee congealed in the bottom, and a book left open as if the reader had simply drifted away. The door was locked from the inside. I knocked and called out his name. No answer. When we forced the door, the stale air hit us first, cold, tinged with an acrid undertone, like burned cordite and damp earth. Our flashlights swept the walls and the ceilings. Everything felt frozen, as if the house had been abandoned for years rather than days. On the living room wall, a single envelope was pinned with a silver tack. "It waits for me." Underneath, the wallpaper was stained darker, as though it had absorbed something that could never be washed away. Then we saw him. John Mercer sat slumped in his old plaid armchair by the fireplace, head tipped back, mouth slightly ajar. His eyes were open, pupils fixed on the ceiling, unblinking. In his clenched hand was a crumpled scrap of paper. In spidery ink, the same message: "It waits for me." There were no wounds, no blood, no sign of forced entry or struggle. The fireplace was cold, filled with a drift of pale ashes. Above his head, the mantel clock had stopped at exactly 3:13 a.m. It never ticked again, even when wounded. We searched the house, room by room, windows latched tight, back door bolted, no footprints on the kitchen tiles, no signs that anyone had walked in behind him. In the corner of the bedroom, the old typewriter sat silent. We later matched its worn keys to the letters he'd received, meaning John had typed them himself, but no one could say when or why. As we carried his body out, I looked back across the yard. Near the porch, The grass was flattened in an oval, as though something had knelt there watching him die. The figure in the trees never returned. No new letters ever came. Eventually, the town boarded up the house, nailed shut the windows, and pretended nothing had happened. But the neighbors never forgot the stories. They whispered that whatever came for John had simply finished its business, or worse, that it was still there, patient and hungry, waiting for the next person to live alone at the edge of those pines. Some nights, when the sky is moonless and the wind slips between the houses, people driving past 47 Hemlock Lane say they glimpse it standing between the trees, tall, pale, and unmoving, watching, waiting, and if you see it, they say, you'll start to dream of white envelopes, because once it has chosen you, it never stops coming. Something out there tore our tent apart from the inside, and whatever it was, it wouldn't stop at the canvas walls. I've always believed that nature respects those who tread carefully. But on that frigid slope in the northern Urals, respect turned to a dread so profound it hollowed me out. It was late January 1959 when 9 seasoned hikers, led by a confident and respected 23-year-old named Igor Dyatlov, set out into the Siberian wilderness. They were young, strong, well-equipped engineers and students, drawn together by the shared dream of conquering Otorten Mountain, a peak whose name in the Mansi language means, "Don't go there." The irony would come to haunt them. From the start, the expedition was dogged by deep cold. Sub-zero winds lashed their faces raw, forcing them to huddle in their heavy parkas as they skied across white, treeless expanses. Each evening, they pitched their heavy orange tent, driving stakes deep into the crusted snow, recounting the same jokes and songs to distract themselves from the creeping cold. On the night of February 1st, they chose to camp on an exposed ridge, possibly to avoid losing altitude they'd already gained. The decision has been scrutinized endlessly. Some think they underestimated the wind. Others believe they simply wanted the challenge. Whatever their reasoning, by dusk, their lone tent glowed faintly under a bruised sky, a fragile ember in an ocean of ice. Inside, they documented their progress in journals and photos, smiling faces framed by frost-trimmed hoods, stiff hands clutching battered cameras. You can almost sense the optimism in those final images. 9 people believing they would see spring again. Hours after they settled in, something shattered the stillness. The wind, which had been a constant predator at the tent walls, changed pitch, no longer a howl but a shrill whine, rising and falling like a siren. Some locals later described hearing strange low-frequency vibrations in those mountains, sounds that can stir unease in the human mind. Whether the hikers heard them that night, no one can say. What is certain is that at some point, the terror inside that tent became so overwhelming that they ripped it open from within. Investigators later traced their knife slashes from the inside seams outward. Even in a snowstorm, they could have unzipped the entrance, so why cut? What could drive 9 experienced survivalists to destroy their only shelter against the cold? They fled barefoot, scarcely clothed, as if in a trance or in blind panic. Temperatures had plunged below -30°C. The air itself seemed to seize their lungs. Rescuers would later find a trail of prints in the snow, each footfall gradually fainter, as if the night itself was swallowing them. At the tree line nearly a mile downslope, the first grim clues emerged. 2 of the hikers lay beneath a cedar tree, clad only in their underwear, their skin the pallid hue of moonlit marble. A fire had been built between them, charred twigs and branches scattered nearby, but it hadn't been enough. Their hands were raw and burned, suggesting they'd tried to pull embers closer, desperate for warmth. Overhead, the tree's lower branches were broken, as if someone had climbed up to look for the tent or to escape something on the ground. 3 more bodies were found between the tree line and the ruined tent, their positions frozen mid-crawl, limbs askew at impossible angles. One woman's face was locked in an expression of terror no snowfall could erase. Another hiker had curled into a fetal position, clutching a scrap of clothing that wasn't his own, a final, futile gesture to hold on to life. The last 4 bodies were discovered months later, buried under several feet of snow in a ravine. What rescuers saw there defied reason. 2 men had massive internal injuries, crushed ribs and skull fractures, so violent they resembled car crash victims, yet their skin remained unbroken. 1 woman was missing her tongue and part of her lips. Even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend what could cause such trauma without a trace on the outside. Radiation, too, left its stain. Some of the hikers' clothing registered low, unexplained levels of radioactivity. Officials dismissed it as contamination from lantern mantles, but the rumors quickly outpaced the facts. Theories multiplied in the vacuum left by their deaths. An avalanche was the most prosaic explanation, though no debris was ever found. Others spoke of parachute mines, secret military tests that detonated shockwaves capable of inflicting crushing injuries. A few whispered about the Yeti, some colossal predator that left no prints but shattered bones. Then there were the stranger accounts. Locals reported fiery orbs bobbing in the night sky. Some speculated about infrasound, a pressure wave generated by wind swirling around the mountain, causing overwhelming panic. But no explanation stitched all the fragments into a single coherent story. The official investigation ended by calling it an unknown compelling force. The phrase became legend in itself, fueling decades of speculation. In 2019, the Russian government reopened the case. They concluded an avalanche was most probable. Yet even then, they conceded it could not explain the missing tongue, the unbroken skin over crushed bones, or the radiation. So here is what I believe. Something ancient and merciless dwells in those mountains. It does not care for human ambition or reason. It waits behind every wine-scoured boulder, under every collapsing drift, patient and cold as the tundra itself. 9 lives ended there, their final moments spent in a nightmare no one could name. Today, the Dyatlov Pass remains a name whispered around campfires and in the corners of survival manuals. A cautionary tale that some frontiers are best left alone. And if you ever feel a sudden chill on a lonely ridge or hear the crack of ice when no one else is near, remember, the mountains breathe, and sometimes they wake. They say you can still hear the thud of the axe in the dead of night, though no one dares enter to find out. I first learned at the Villisca house on a biting autumn evening, when the sun dipped below the cornfields and the wind began to carry a low, rattling whisper through the old wooden shutters. It was the kind of night when darkness feels heavier, as though it's pressing in on your ribs. The address was simple: 508 East 2nd Street, Villisca, Iowa. A modest 2-story frame home that looked, in the bright safety of daylight, like any other, a white clapboard facade, front porch sagging a little with age, lace curtains, moth-eaten and motionless. But by dusk, its windows turned hollow and black, staring like empty eyes. The front door hung askew on its hinges, gaping just enough to look as though the house was drawing a slow breath, daring you in. That night, I parked my car on the cracked pavement across the street. The street lamp flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow halo that never quite reached the stoop. As I stepped out, I felt the chill settle deep in my bones. A cold that felt less like weather and more like warning. My boots scraped over old leaves as I crossed to the porch. The floorboards groaned under my weight, each step echoing into the hollow dark inside. I pressed my palm to the glass-paned door, cold as a corpse, coated in a thick layer of dust and something darker that flaked off against my skin. Old blood? Tar? I didn't want to guess. The latch clicked, reluctant but defeated, and the door swung inward with a sigh that sounded almost human. Inside, the front parlor was cluttered with time's debris, a rusted mantel clock frozen at 12:45, a moth-eaten sofa propped against the far wall, and a child's doll face down on the floor, its porcelain cheek cracked as though it had been thrown. I paused, straining to listen. The only sounds were the faint buzz of the dying street lamp and my own breath, quick and shallow. Each inhalation felt too loud, as if the house was listening. Back then, in 1912, the Moore family lived here, Josiah and Sarah. There 4 young children and 2 visiting girls. It had been a normal Sunday, church services, a lantern-lit walk home, a supper of cold meat and bread. By dawn, all 8 would be dead bludgeoned as they slept in their beds, and the killer would vanish into the cornfields, as if swallowed by the earth itself. I moved deeper into the house, my flashlight's thin beam jittering across walls yellowed with age. In the dining room, a long table remained set, as though waiting for a meal that would never come. Plates stacked neatly, silverware glinting under layers of dust. I bent to study the dark smear along the floorboards by a chair that no longer stood. Rust, I told myself, but my heart refused to believe it. I kept thinking of the stories, how neighbors had found every mirror in the house covered with cloth, every lamp extinguished but one, how the killer had lingered, taking the time to cook a plate of bacon he never ate, to wash his hands in a bowl still reed when the sheriff arrived. There was something deliberate in the way he or it had moved. Too deliberate. Upstairs, the hallway stretched into a darkness that seemed to thicken the longer I stared. The banisters spindles through spidery shadows against peeling wallpaper. I climbed slowly, each step creaking like an accusation. At the top, 4 doors waited. The first led to the master bedroom, Mr. and Mrs. Moore's bed still in place, sagging under the weight of memory. The air smelled of mildew and something sharper, like old regret. I tried not to imagine the sound the axe must have made in that small, close room. Next came the children's rooms. Freshly painted walls, wooden bed frames cracked by time, drawers pulled out and left gaping. I pictured small hands clapping over sleepy eyes when the door creaked open, the axe rising and falling in the dark. In the smallest bedroom, I found the axe. A replica, the guidebook said, placed there for the curious. But even knowing it wasn't the original, my fingers trembled when I reached out to touch the worn hickory handle. It felt wrong to touch it, as though by laying my hand there I'd invite something to step closer, to show me exactly what happened. They say 6 footprints were found outside, leading from the back porch into the yard, then trailing off into the cornfields. By the time investigators arrived, the morning dew had begun to erase them. The killer left almost nothing behind. No fingerprints, no bloody footprints inside, no confession that ever held up. One man confessed, then recanted. A traveling minister was tried twice and acquitted both times. Some whispered that a spirit had claimed the family, that the house was cursed long before the Moores ever lived there. Others said it was the land itself, black Iowa soil steeped in something older than memory. I stood in the hallway, my flashlight flickering, sweat pricking my skin despite the cold. Somewhere behind me, a floorboard creaked too close. I turned sharply. Nothing. Just the dark and the shadows my mind kept trying to populate. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought I heard a child's giggle. High, soft, almost shy. I forced myself to move to the last room. At the end of the hall, a larger space with a battered trunk in the corner. Inside, a child's leather shoe, a handkerchief monogrammed, yellowed letters from a mother planning a church picnic she would never attend. Scrawled on the underside of the lid in black charcoal was a marking I could not read, a symbol, or a childish doodle, or perhaps something older. My flashlight wavered over drips that looked like candle wax, or blood. I fled then, down the stairs, past the lifeless parlor, out into the night air that felt almost warm compared to the cold inside. The house loomed behind me, silent again, but I knew better. Even now, when I close my eyes, I feel small footsteps pacing behind me. I hear a child's voice, almost tender, whispering my name. The Villisca house stands empty. The doors are chained, the windows black, but it waits for the next soul brave or foolish enough to come searching for answers. Because in that place, unblessed by forgiveness or peace, the past never dies. It watches, it remembers, and it
Some mysteries are terrifying because they can't be explained, others because they can. If this video left you uneasy, good. That means you were paying attention. Subscribe for more real horror stories, true events that are scarier than any movie. Hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. And let me know in the comments which story kept you up tonight.